debate happening. We have Brandon, we have Jiva. Brandon's taken the position that people with autism should not be forced to wear a mask in public. Jiva's taken the opposition. It will be based upon who concedes. If we don't hear a concession, we'll put a voting poll where the audience can vote on who they think performed better in the debate. No time limit, light moderation. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
All right, I guess I'll just introduce the position clearly, so people understand. First of all, both of us live in the UK, so we have basically the same laws regarding wearing masks. So you don't have to wear them when you just leave the house. It's just when you go inside, like shops and buildings that would require it, like other than your home and public transport. And I'm taking the position that people with autism should not be forced to wear a mask in these circumstances.
Yeah, so is that your introduction, Brandon?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, so I'm obviously opposing the motion or the proposition. And I think firstly, we need to understand the reasons for enforcing face masks on the public.
Mm-hmm.
So, COVID-19 is a severely contagious and deadly disease, and wearing face masks in public drastically reduces the spread of this disease and consequently significantly reduces mortality rates. Those are not views that I necessarily agree with, but for the sake of arguing against a proposition, those are premises which I will adopt and which you two
Yeah.
have agreed to adopt. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So I think one of the main issues I have with your proposition is that I actually find it discriminatory. And the reason for this is because disability medicine is not based on diagnosis, it's based on symptoms and functionality. And there's a reason for this. So if we take the example of disabled badges for drivers, which we have here in the UK, I think most parts of the world do have them as well. Essentially, the badge enables people with disabilities to park in privileged designated car parking spots. The allocation of such badges is not based on a diagnosis, it's based on functionality, what a person can and can't do. So
Yeah.
the state, so the state doesn't say people with arthritis of the knees should be entitled to the badge. Instead, the state says people who are unable to walk 100 meters should be entitled to the badge. The reason this distinction is made is because we recognize that there are some people with arthritis of the knees that can walk thousands of meters with no problem, and therefore to arbitrarily allocate the badge to them would be unfair and unreasonable. And I think even, well, I'll just make one final point. Even the issue with the face mask measures imposed here in the United Kingdom, anyway, if you look at the official government website, it says, and I'll quote, that certain groups or certain people are exempt, and it says people who cannot put on, wear, or remove a face covering because of a physical or mental illness or impairment or disability, or where putting on, wearing, or removing a face covering will cause you severe distress. So there is no mention of any specific diagnoses in there. They're not saying if you have asthma or COPD or autism, you are exempt, because that would be a blanket generalization. And they don't want to limit it to specific diseases or illnesses, but rather cater to the individual needs of a person. So I'll yield there and let you respond.
So, but you're saying like it would be futile to have a law about not like forcing people with autism to wear masks because it's already the case that people who get severely distressed from wearing masks don't have to wear them.
Precisely. So I don't think you need that additional blanket generalization.
Mhm. Yeah, but there's another thing to take into consideration here is that like
Mhm.
not everybody with autism is going to like say that they have severe distress and be accepted like by society to not wear the mask, like
Mhm.
especially if they have difficulties with communication, it's going to be hard for them to communicate that. So it'd be easier for them to just present like a card or something that they've received from their GP that says they have autism, um, and why they don't need to wear the mask, uh, rather than having to explain that they just get severely distressed, because that's also going to be like that society is going to think that they're just lying about that. Whereas if they have a reason for it, then it's going to be more accepted. They'll be like, oh, okay, you're not just making this up, you actually have a condition, which makes it so that you get distressed from wearing this mask. And otherwise, it's just going to lead to more distress, certain shops just rejecting people from coming
Mm,
in and stuff, and it wouldn't actually be effective
mm.
for a lot of people with autism.
Okay, well, there are a few issues there, and I think the first one we should probably touch on is what we consider to be distress. As I mentioned, the government website says severe distress. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's reasonable to presume that the majority of people with autism wouldn't have severe distress from wearing a mask in public buildings and public spaces. Would you agree with that uh,
I'm not sure if it's
presupposition?
the majority, but
Okay, a
possibly, yeah.
significant proportion. Yeah. Okay. Um, so the issue is that I don't think there is a need or requirement to make a generalization to say to all people with autism that you have a free pass to not wear a mask. I think it should be individual cases.
Oh, yeah, but just by making this like a law doesn't mean that all autistic people are gonna have to not wear a mask. You can like
Well,
have it so that when they're trying to get their card to show that they don't need to wear a mask, you like frantically explain all of the potential risks that they're taking by not wearing a mask. And there's obviously going to be pressure from society to wear a mask as well. So I don't think that just by introducing this law that all people with autism are just going to take it as a pass to not wear a mask.
Well, it's interesting you say that, but the issue is we know from sociological studies and behavioral psychology that when you give people a free pass to do something, they generally take it. Now, I agree with you, not all will, okay? But let's say, for example, with speeding restrictions, when you remove speeding cameras on a road, we know that the average speed of drivers goes up, right? Because there's a deterrent factor there. So, similarly, if you say to people, society, if you have autism, you don't need to wear a mask, right? Then we can rationally conclude a larger proportion of people with autism who do not experience severe distress will not wear a mask. Do you agree with that?
But would it not be different if you also told the people that are driving that they have a significantly higher risk, like not just a small risk, because I'm aware that it does increase the risk of killing people and yourself if you speed, but
Yeah.
it's significant in the case of COVID, right? So I don't think it's going to be the case that the same sociological implications would
Well,
apply because
I would
you
disagree
would
with you there.
explain
I would
but you would
disagree with you there because
explain that there is a significant risk of you getting this disease and explain all of the problems, and you can show
Mhm.
them imagery and stuff, and say that there's a risk for other people in society as well, and combine that with the factor of wanting to conform with society already. Like, you don't want to
Mm.
be the odd one out not wearing a mask and then have people give you weird glares, ask why aren't you wearing your mask and stuff. Don't think that it's going to be the case that all autistic people, or like a significant amount of autistic people that don't have an issue with wearing a mask will like stop doing it.
Well, you're relying on the goodwill principle there, and the issue is that we know that with the mask, I mean, you alluded to the risk to the individual, but we know that actually there isn't a significant risk to the individual in not wear a significant increase in risk to the individual in wearing the mask or not wearing the mask. The risk is to, to the wider public, isn't it? It's the risk of increasing
Yeah, yeah,
spread, not the risk of getting the illness yourself. So there's not really from a selfish point of view, there's not really an incentive to wear the mask. It's only an altruistic reason
yeah.
to wear the
Well,
mask, right?
there's that and the societal pressure. Like, personally,
Uh,
need
yeah,
I
but
don't need to
societal
like not
pressure,
wear a
you're trying.
mask, but I could not wear it, right, and just claim, oh, I'm autistic, so I don't need to wear a mask. But I
Yeah.
don't want to do that because I don't want to have all the people like giving me weird glares and like confronting me while I'm just trying to like rock back and forth on a bus or something.
Right. But some people
Why are you
don't
not
care
wearing
about
a
that, do
mask,
they?
right?
Some people don't care about that because
But
we
I
know
think,
when these measures were.
but
We know when
how
these
many
measures.
people?
Yeah. Well, we know.
I
Well,
think
when
it's
you say how many people, the reason that the government has had to enforce this as law, right, is because people don't abide by the rules when they're not law, right? That's what we know. So when
do you not think
when the
it's different
restriction
with autistic individuals?
possibly, yeah, possibly, but I don't think you can make a blanket generalization like that.
No, I just think it would be
and-
very few people that don't conform to this societal pressure within the like people who have a diagnosis of autism.
Yeah, but the point, okay, so let's take this a step further. So autism, it's said to have a prevalence rate of about 1%, over 1%, I think. So there's presumed to be 700,000 people with autism in the United Kingdom. So if you're saying to them, oh, you don't need to wear a mask, that societal pressure immediately gets revoked anyway, because people will just presume that anybody without a mask has autism or another significant mental health disability or physical health disability. So that societal pressure goes away anyway if your proposition comes true.
Don't think that's the case, because it actually is the case that you don't have to wear a mask with autism, and yet people still aren't aware of like what autism even is, and they'll still give these autistic individuals like a glare and ask them why they're not wearing a mask, and like try and force them to wear a mask in like the shop they're going into and stuff. And it is the case that autistic people don't have to wear a mask right now. So
Well, no,
if
it's the
that
case that
effect,
people.
it hasn't
No.
come into play.
No. It's people with severe disability. I read the government regulations, didn't I? It's people with severe impairments. Also, sorry, people with severe distress. So that's subjective,
Yeah.
isn't it? So people
Yeah,
with
but,
autism
like-
may meet that criteria, but they may not as well. At the
No,
moment,
but
it's not.
when they explain
regulated.
why that they aren't wearing it, the reason they're going to give is that they're autistic and have sensory difficulties. And I don't think
Right,
the
okay.
public has a good understanding of what autism even is, to know that it's not all autistic individuals that have this issue.
Yes, okay. Well, you mentioned sensory impairment there. So could you give me your reasons for why you think autistic people should not be forced to wear the mask from a sort of psychopathology point of view? What's the distress that comes from wearing a mask?
Well, many of them are hypersensitive to the sense of touch, and it causes them a lot of stress.
Sense of touch, but presumably they wear clothes, they wear caps, they wear socks.
A lot of them have issues with certain types of clothing, actually, and they have to wear specific fabrics, specific cuts of clothing. So it's not like it's just an issue with the mask.
So is it not possible to cater to those needs and get masks made of the appropriate materials? Because we're talking about public health, public safety here, aren't we? It's a huge issue.
We don't know how effective that's actually going to be. They're still going to have a mask on their face they're not used to, and they suddenly have to wear it all the time. You know?
But we are talking about.
It's going to be the case.
Yeah, but we are talking about public health and public safety. You yourself conceded that this is a serious issue and mortality rates will increase without people wearing masks. So you have to make a good justification for somebody breaking a severe distress, a severe impairment, and a severe disability. And so far, you presented the idea that they might not like the material on their face. Could you strengthen that argument?
That would cause a lot of severe distress for a lot of people. Like it may sound like very minor to some people, but it is the case that it would cause severe distress for these people. Even though it just sounds like, oh, it's a bit of fabric. Calm down, mate.
No. I wasn't saying that. I was saying, no, I actually agree with you. I mean, one man's meat is another's poison, and it's all subjective. I absolutely agree. But the point I'm trying to make is, from a psychopathology point of view, I can't see why there would be a generic reason for people with autism to struggle with wearing the mask. For example, I understand sensory input is a big problem, but that's mainly to do with visual and auditory sensory inputs, sights and sounds. By wearing a mask, you're only reducing your. No, no, not always. But what the mask? What do you mean not always? Sorry, I
It's
said
not always
predominantly.
just the. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
I
don't
said
see why
predominantly.
that's relevant.
Well, it's relevant because by wearing a mask, you're only sort of impeding your olfactory, your smell sensation, perhaps your taste sensation to a small degree, but your visual and auditory stimulation isn't being affected. So I'm struggling to sort of see why the mask would be such an impairment for somebody with autism and why it would cause such distress. And now I can see that it may in some cases, but my point is it's a minority of cases. So I wouldn't say it's incumbent on the state to, impose a sort of blanket rule that people with autism shouldn't have to wear the mask.
Well, I don't think it's like the minority that it would cause distress. Maybe it's the minority that would have such severe distress that they can't even like put the mask on because they have like a mental breakdown. But I do think even if it's just a less severe like stress that they get from wearing the mask, that most autistic people do have this.
Yeah, so
For
it's a less severe.
example,
Carry on, sorry.
yeah, for example, myself, I mainly have issues with auditory and
Mhm.
visual sensory
Yeah.
input. But
Mhm.
sometimes when I'm already stressed, especially, the mask really is like a burden, and it's horrible. I have to like hurry up and get to an area where I don't
Yeah.
have to wear it anymore. And I genuinely don't have any issues with um, touch as a sensory overload.
Yeah, and certainly, for example, in your case, I wouldn't say that you're not exempt, right? But the point I'm trying to make is
Hmm.
that I think it should be based on an individual case by case basis. So, for example, you could, um, I personally think it could be get to the point where it should be enforced. Like there should be proof. So, medical certification, for example, you should have to go to your GP and maybe get a certificate to say that you are exempt. Um, but I wouldn't say that people with autism per se would and should be exempt because I don't think they would all have the same symptoms that you have. As we know, autism is a very diverse condition. There's a huge spectrum, and there are many people with autism who can function very well, and there are many people without autism that can't function well. So there are probably as many people without autism who have other mental health problems which prevent them from putting the mask on or wearing the mask in public, right? So I don't think
Yeah,
you
I
can just.
don't think
Yeah.
that they shouldn't be exempt. I'm just my justification for
Mm,
making it a blanket term of autism
mm.
was that like many people with autism have like communication issues as well, and it's going to be hard for them. They might even want to go to the doctor to get this like certification or whatever for severe distress because they have
Yes,
like
but
social
but that's how but
anxiety.
that's how
And
but that's but sorry, I just wanted to interrupt you, but that's how society works, isn't it? So, for example, if you want a disabled badge, you have to go through certain procedures, you have to get certification. If you want to be exempt from work, right, the state doesn't say you can just self-certify. You have to pass certain assessments and prove that your disability prevents you from seeking work, in which case you then become eligible for state benefits or welfare. And I understand that's a distressing process for many people to go through, but unfortunately, we have to implement
yeah,
such
just
processes
just
as a
because
deterrent.
it is the case doesn't mean that it should be the case
Yeah.
in terms of autism. So I don't see why
No,
that
I
is a
agree.
valid point. But yeah, so I did have a justification for it being made a blanket term, and I also gave a pragmatical reason for why I don't think making it a blanket term would actually cause the people with autism
Mm.
that don't
Okay, so
have these
let's come
issues
from.
to not wear their masks unless they have an issue in a specific circumstance and they need to take it off or something.
Okay, so obviously I don't want to make this personal, but you did mention that you obviously have distress from wearing the mask, and that's understandable, and I empathise. But does a point come where you would say, right, my personal distress is outweighed by the greater risk to society? So, for example, if you were told that not wearing your mask would kill a person, right? Within, let's say, within the year, it's going to kill a person through spread of the disease. Um, would you value that? Would you say that outweighs your personal discomfort or distress from wearing the mask?
I mean, it would probably depend. on like the circumstances myself, even though it sometimes causes me distress, I still just wear the mask, right? But certain people, I think, if they don't want to wear the mask because it's causing them too much stress, then they should have the right to still be able to do the basic necessities that people need to do,
But they do
like
have that right at the moment under the
going
current
to
regulations.
yeah, but like I said, it might be harder for certain people to communicate this, and then they might not do it, and they'll just stay home and panic. Or if they like need to go to the bank urgently, and they don't want to speak to their doctor because of social anxiety to get, and
Okay,
it's
yes,
going to
but
take them a while to do that process as well,
yeah.
and they have to go like now. But if they are just able to say, yeah, I have autism or whatever, um, so I don't have to wear the mask all the time. I'm sorry. I just need to quickly go in the bank. Um,
Mm.
then it's going to be all right for me.
But under the current regulations, they can currently say, I've got severe mental distress from wearing the mask, and therefore I'm exempt. I mean, what difference? So you think it makes it a bit more
I
comfortable for
think that
them?
people would just say they're lying, and it's like, can you provide some sort of proof? And then they would still need to get that certification.
Right. And you think that harm from people thinking they're lying is outweighed by a significant increase in mortality caused by an increase in people with autism not wearing masks?
In the case that the person needs to just do a necessity, yes, and it's not like 100% chance of killing somebody. You know,
No,
there
no,
can
I
be there
concede
can
that, but
be
we both.
other there can be like other precautions taken for the individual who has difficulties wearing the mask. Like maybe somebody in the field of medicine can come up with a solution to decrease the risk of them spreading the
Mm,
virus without them having to wear a mask.
right. Because I mean, the issue is, and I agree with you. It's not clear what the risk of not wearing a mask actually is. But for the sake of this debate, we are considering it to be significant. So let's take
Yeah,
another example. Yeah. So let's take another example. Airport security. Right. Everybody has to go through airport security. There are no exemptions to that rule. You have to go through a metal detector. Would you say somebody with, let's say, a psychotic illness like paranoid schizophrenia who just refuses to go through a metal detector because it causes him significant distress and he has beliefs, psychotic, delusional beliefs about that system, and he doesn't even let anybody pat him down? Do you think he should be exempt from the process of airport security and be allowed to go through onto the plane without going
uh,
through?
no, because it wouldn't be a necessity for them to go on the plane.
Well, no, it may be as much as a necessity for somebody with autism to go to a cafe, right?
Oh, I'm not saying it's a necessity for somebody with autism to go to a cafe, but people don't have to wear the masks when they're eating or drinking in a cafe anyway.
True. But the point is not about necessity. The point is about because the mask law is not
No,
about
but
necessity, is it?
I think the necessity is what like justifies it. In the case of a schizo going on an airplane and they don't want to go through the security checks, I don't think that's a necessity, so I don't think it's
No. To be
justified.
honest, yeah, but to be honest, you can't argue that flying is not a necessity, but going out in public on a bus or a train is, can you?
Why can't I argue that? Why,
Well,
like,
isn't it the same?
it's
They're both the same, aren't they? They're
very
just
few
transport.
cases that
Right?
somebody needs to go on a plane, right? But you need to go to the supermarket or to get groceries. If you can't get them delivered, you need
Okay.
to sometimes go and do certain things,
Well, I
like
think
go
you're
to
missing
your
the point.
bank.
Yeah, I think you're missing the point of the analogy. It's not really specific to flying. I'm just saying there are certain things in society where people are forced, right, to go through certain measures for public safety, for public health and public safety, right? Even like you can think of the law, the police, right? We're all obliged to pull over if a policeman stops us. We can't claim personal distress as an excuse to not do that, right? And the reason such measures are used is because the greater good, utilitarian principles, right? It's the greater good. It's enforcing public safety and public measures to ensure
Okay, sorry, I just
protection of society.
disconnected.
Oh,
So
right, okay.
you were explaining why I'm not understanding the analogy.
Yeah, so I was just saying, I think you're missing the point of the analogy. It's not specific to flying. I'm just saying there are certain systems, rules, and regulations in society where everybody has to subscribe to them and comply with them for the greater good of society, right? For society, for protection, for public safety. You can think of surveillance issues, policing. So just park the necessity element to one side for a moment. Let's say it is necessary for this person, schizophrenic, to fly. Right? Perhaps he's in a foreign country and he needs to get back home. He's been sectioned and detained and he needs to
How
get back
did he
home.
get to the foreign country in the first place?
So he went by a ship. I don't know. Let's say he
Oh, then
swam
he could
there.
just
That's irrelevant, isn't
he
it, to the
can go
argument?
back by the ship, right? He can go
No,
back
no, because
however
he's
he got
no.
there
Let's say
without
he's
going through the
no.
airport
I said he's
security.
been detained. He's been detained under mental health law, and now they want to bring him back urgently on a flight, and he refuses to go through metal detection and through airport security. Right now, what is? Are you saying he should be exempt or not?
Well, no, he's being detained. This is a different circumstance.
Well, the point, no, the point I'm trying to make is right that I think you would argue he's not exempt from going through those metal detections because the reason is because of greater good and public safety and public interest. So we know that if you let one person sort of escape the system like this, then it opens the door for others to do the same. And then the whole system crumbles. Airport security is compromised and the threat to public safety is increased. Right? And you can apply a similar argument here to the face masks issue, whereby if you say, um, well, we're going to allow certain groups to be exempt from wearing the face mask, then it opens a door for lots of people to not wear the face mask and increases the risk to wider society.
I mean, I don't see that as a valid argument because certain groups have been made exempt, and we haven't seen more and more people trying to be exempt from the rule. It's still the majority of people wearing face masks. But I don't, I'm not seeing the point of the analogy because I don't see any circumstance where they would have to like get the aeroplane back, and if they're being detained, then it's a different circumstance because legal action is already being taken against them.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, legal action has been taken against them for the detention, but they would still need to be transported via plane back to the country.
Why are they being detained?
Well, it can be for various reasons, isn't it? Risk to self, risk to others, psychotic relapse, or is it psychotic breakdown?
All right, then I would say that you would be justified in making them go through the security checks.
Right, even though it causes them significant distress.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
they should
and the
be in
reason,
a mental institute. The distress isn't caused by like a regulation per se. They already have delusions, and they just don't want to go through the regulation.
I'm not talking about see, you're missing the point of the analogy. I'm not talking about the delusions causing distress. I'm talking about the airport security causing them distress,
No, but they
right?
already have a severe mental illness, which makes them like distressed all the time. Because if they're schizophrenic, they
No,
have
not necessarily.
delusions.
Not necessarily. You don't have to be distressed if you're as a schizophrenic. You'd be quite happy. You could have mania, be quite happy. So that's
Yeah,
beside the point.
I
I mean,
just see the analogy you're creating is like completely unrealistic, and it's like very fringe. So I'm not gonna say they're
well,
exempt.
yeah. I mean, look, when I brought I brought the issue. I mean, you're right. I think we've gone there too far into the analogy. It was just a general point about public safety and measures which are used, regulations which are used and enforced on everybody without exclusions, without exemptions, to ensure certain
Yeah,
right.
yeah. It just comes down to like, should these autistic individuals have the right to do the basic necessities to live, um,
Mm.
or should they not have the right to do that and be forced to abide by the societal restrictions.
Yeah, true. I mean, because obviously the point I was making with the airport security as well is actually not relevant to the argument that I'm supporting, because that would be exclusive, right? So that would be like say everybody has to wear the face masks. The face mask. There are no exceptions.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but interestingly, I think you can defend that position as well if you were able to show that the risk of not wearing the face mask would would be very high to public safety. Would you agree with me there that if the risk was
Mm,
extremely high, you could enforce it?
I don't know how you would defend that position. What, like, I get people with breathing issues are like more at risk of COVID. Should
Well,
they have the right
exactly.
to do basic things that they need to live? Because if they wear the
Well,
mask, then they're just going to suffocate probably.
well, exactly. Okay, so then you're into a risk-benefit analysis, aren't you? And there may
Yeah.
be yeah. But let's say, for example, you had somebody with a breathing difficulty, and let's say if they wore a mask in public spaces, they would die, right? But let's say if they didn't wear the
Hmm.
mask in public spaces, they would infect and kill 10 people within a year, right? Hypothetically. Okay. Then there is an argument to say, well, actually, they should be forced to wear the mask. And if they can't, then they shouldn't be out in public spaces. Would you agree with that argument?
Not necessarily. Like, there can be necessities that they need to go outside for, and there can also be other measures which can be taken to reduce the risk of them spreading the virus. You can
Well,
get around the issues that
this is a
people have.
hypothetical. No, no, this is a hypothetical, isn't it? Where we're saying there's two options: either they wear the mask and preserve their own life, or they don't wear the mask and kill 10 people within a year. It's a hypothetical, admittedly, and it's not feasible, but it's not likely. But it's it's a thought experiment. What would you argue for
I'm
there?
not sure what I would think in that because it's a thought experiment not based in reality, so I'm
But
trying
it's
to
not.
consider other things and I just don't
It's
know.
not a far stretch of the imagination, though, is it? It's not a far stretch to think what could happen if you have a severely contagious illness spreading as
Well, you're only
a
giving
pandemic.
me like two options, so I'm just thinking,
What
um,
would be other option? Could you think
I'm
of
not
any real?
sure if the rights outweigh it. Yeah, that like other medical interventions could be created to get around the breathing difficulties
There aren't
and
any,
stop
are
the
there?
spread of the virus.
There aren't any, are there, at the moment?
Face shield, is that like a viable option?
Well, I think
It would
we
be
are
for
we
the
not
people
applying.
with breathing difficulties.
Yeah, but are we not considering the face shield as part of the mask? Because I'm guessing that's for the sake of the argument. That's what we're considering in the autism issue as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm saying in the case of somebody with breathing difficulties, we
Mm.
can find a way around them not being able to wear a mask, right? So
Mhm,
they still have
mhm,
their rights to do the basic necessities.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable point. I mean, the point. So essentially, what I'm trying to argue is that I think where not wearing the face mask should be the exception and not the rule. I think with your measure, your proposition, it becomes the rule more than the exception, right? As I said, there is a significant proportion of the population do have autism, it's over 1%, and that's a lot of people. And I don't think the majority of
Yeah,
them would struggle severely with wearing the face mask.
yeah, I also
Um,
think the majority that wouldn't struggle would wear the masks.
well, that's a presumption, isn't it? And as I said, the problem with that, from as we know from psychological studies and so, sociological studies, sorry, and behavioral psychology, is that people do, if you do give them a free pass, they generally take it. And that, call me cynical, but I think we've seen
Yeah,
that in the UK ourselves,
but
haven't
I'm
we?
saying
Because people, yeah.
there are other
Can I just
factors here.
can I just finish this?
There
Can
are
I just
other
finish the point?
factors at play there. You can finish, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was just going to say, because we saw that in the UK ourselves, didn't we? Initially, the restriction measures, the lockdown measures were voluntary. And within a week, people were just flooding to the beaches and they weren't applying the rules. And then they had to become enforced because of that. Similarly, with the masks, there's a reason they've made it law and not voluntary. It could be voluntary, couldn't it? They could just rely on goodwill from people. Um, but they're not. They've enforced it and made it law, and there's a fine if you don't abide by the law. And the reason for that is because they can't rely on people's goodwill. Because generally, when you give people options, they don't necessarily, it's a sad truth of life, but they don't act responsibly. They act selfishly more than altruistically. And I don't think you're trying to make the generalization that autistic people are different. They might be slightly, I agree, but I don't think you can make that presumption and generalization without solid evidence to support it.
But that's a different situation because that's when it was first introduced, and it wasn't the societal norm to wear a mask. Now it is a societal norm, and that means that you have the societal pressure to take into account, especially for individuals with autism who the societal pressure would affect more, because you don't want to stand out from the crowd and you don't want to have to try and explain yourself to people because normally you have social anxiety or you just can't even communicate to them properly.
Some people with autism, remember, autism is a very diverse condition. It's a huge
Yeah, I'm
spectrum.
aware.
There are
Uh,
100 odd symptoms, 100 odd. I mean, in those questionnaires for diagnosing autism, there are over 100 questions. I mean, it ranges massively from high functioning autism to low functioning autism. People with low IQs and significant learning disabilities don't even consider what other people think of them, do they? And 50% of autistic people have significant learning disabilities. They might not care and not conform to social norms and social pressures and feel self-conscious. So I think
if
you're
that's the
making a grand
case, they're
generalization.
low functioning.
Mm.
If they're low functioning, they normally have like a carer or somebody who's going to look out for them, right? And then
True.
it's not even going to come down to their decision. They
No, but
won't even be aware of this law.
well, no, when I say low functioning, they may still have some cognitive abilities, right? They may be able to go to a shop and buy some food themselves independently, right? But they may not care other people think they're, cheating, shall we
Yeah,
say.
I'll
So I
grant
don't think
there's
that would
some
be a big issue
people
for
that
them.
wouldn't care, but I think that the majority of people with autism would care about these
Well,
societal pressures.
that's a gross
And
that's a gross assumption, isn't it? Which is not really, you've not based that in any evidence or medicine, have you? I
I
mean,
mean, I've
you're just
based it
getting.
on the fact that the majority of people with autism having like social anxiety symptoms.
Yeah, but we know.
And
But the
there's
point
other
is, we
like
know that.
there's other generalized behavioral studies about people wanting to conform to the norms and what other people are doing, even without autism. So I'm just saying it's even increased in the individuals with autism.
Perhaps, but I don't know if you can say that it's significantly increased, that people who don't experience severe distress would wear the mask for that reason. I think that's a gross assumption, because we know, in the general public, right, people don't wear the mask, do they? Not, and they don't care what other people think, right? They'll take the
Some
abuse.
people,
Um, yeah.
some people, sure, but I think for the most case, we can look at
Mm.
these behavioral studies about people wanting to conform to what others are doing, even if like they think that what the others are doing are wrong, right? They're going to
Mm.
conform to that. And I would say it would be increased in individuals with autism.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't dispute that. I suspect it would be increased as well, but I don't know if it would be significantly increased to warrant.
It
So are
doesn't
you
matter if
suggesting
it's significant or not, because
it
it's
does? It
already
does.
significant.
No, 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 it does. That's the whole point. Because, for example, if at the moment, yeah, let's say 10% of people with autism are not wearing the face mask in public, right, because of severe
Hmm.
distress. Now, if you imposed your proposition as law, that number could increase to 20%, double, right? I think it's reasonable to conclude that there would be an increase, because some people would just say, well, I don't have to, then I won't, even though it doesn't bother me that much, right? Now, that is a significant, you've doubled the amount of people not wearing a face mask. That could increase the mortality rate. Remember at the beginning we said
No, you only
significant
doubled the
increase in
autistic
mortality.
people not having to
I
wear a face mask.
agree, but the spread of the infection is significantly increased, isn't it? And we agreed at the start
Yeah,
that there
and
was a
then we
slight
just
risk in
then we
increasing
go
the spread
back
of the illness.
to whether or not we think the people that have issues with trying to get exempt from wearing a mask for reasons like severe distress if
Mm.
they're on the spectrum, right? Whether or not they should have the right to be able to claim that I'm autistic and or just have a card for it or whatever, and I don't have to wear a face mask. It's, do you think that the trade-off is worth it? And just because they're not wearing a face mask
Mm.
doesn't mean that we can't try and come up with some other intervention to stop the spread of the virus. Like I'm not sure what that would be. That would be down to medical professionals to try and figure out.
Well, I think we can't really go down that route, can we? Because the premise of the argument is that not wearing the mask increases the risk significantly. So I think
Mhm.
that's beside the point. Because if you're to
Well,
propose that,
assuming that you're not doing anything else, like there are other things that you could do to reduce the spread in the same way that wearing a mask would.
sorry,
There are other things that you could do to reduce the spread of the virus in the same way that the mask would do it.
like what?
Like I gave the example of a face shield. Granted that in the case of an autistic individual, they would still have the sensory difficulties, but that doesn't mean that there's no way to um,
Well,
decrease
sorry,
the
yeah,
spread of the virus without
okay,
imposing these
yeah.
sensory issues.
Might be a slight misunderstanding here, but when in the proposition when you said, and maybe I should have clarified this at the start, when you said they should be exempt from face mask wearing, I thought that included face shields, any sort of protective gear on the
There
face.
could be something else though, like maybe they just have to hold something in front of their face and then they don't have an issue.
Yeah, but what are you saying that should be law then, enforced?
I'm saying that there could be some other method in which they would reduce the spread of the virus,
Mm.
right? So just making it so they don't have to wear a face mask doesn't necessarily mean that the risk is going to be increased. It might be, but we could try and come up with some other way and still preserve their rights.
Okay. Well, the other issue I wanted to touch on is that the actual diagnosis of autism, as I'm sure you're aware, is very
Yeah.
it's arbitrary and somewhat subjective. So, for example, a person may see a psychiatrist and get a diagnosis of autism, and see another psychiatrist and be told he doesn't have autism. Right. Additionally, we know that there are probably a lot of people undiagnosed with the condition in society. In addition to that, it's a postcode lottery. We know that many people are awaiting a diagnosis and have been awaiting up to 3 years for an assessment and a formal diagnosis. So the issue is with when you say people with autism should be exempt and they should have a card which says I have autism, which would offer them some protection from society. What about those people who don't have the formal diagnosis but have the symptoms, have the severe distress? They don't have the card, right? So that they will be
Yeah.
stigmatized and scrutinized more by
Um,
society if they don't have
the
the card.
the chances are, right, that they can appeal to severe distress, and you can say maybe that there's going to be people that, because they do have autism undiagnosed, can't
Mm.
communicate that properly. But I think for those individuals, they're already going to have a diagnosis.
Yeah, but the point is, Brandon, that let's say, for example, you're saying it's a big problem, like stigmatization from people, from the public is a big problem, but you're actually going to increase that stigmatization if people have cards, because then the people who don't have cards will be stigmatized even more. They will be branded as liars and cheats. Whereas at the moment, if there's no card
Do you think
system,
all people that aren't wearing a mask will just automatically be stigmatized more if they don't have a card?
that's the point you're making, right? That's the point you're saying. You're saying people with autism are stigmatized at the moment because there's no official system or card which exempts them. So the public think they're cheating. That's your point.
Yeah, and that would be an issue for people with autism, right? But it's not necessarily going to be an issue for your person who's like lip reads because they're deaf. They're gonna just, it's going to be very obvious because they could have social anxiety, but it's going to be a
Yeah.
very
So
reduced
person who
risk.
literally,
So they can just go, I can't hear you, and then it's going to be obvious why they're not wearing a mask or something.
how is a person who lip reads going to struggle by wearing a mask himself?
Because somebody like that, he might not be able to speak, right? in a coherent way. So they're like person who's with them would have to read their lips as well. That is like a genuine reason to not wear a mask.
Well, I don't follow. I mean, we're saying the autistic person lip reads to understand
No,
communication.
I'm
And
not saying that's an autistic person. I'm giving you an example of somebody who wouldn't face the issues of the stigmatization, right? It's just going to be very apparent very quickly
Mhm.
why they're not wearing a mask. Whereas with an autistic person who can't even explain it and it's not immediately obvious, they're going to have to face the anxiety that they get from this.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it is that obviously apparent. I think a lot of people can't detect any issues with not sorry, detect autism on just general interactions and conversations,
No,
right?
I don't think it's apparent for autism. That's the point. Whereas if somebody goes like, I can't hear you, like obviously that
Yeah.
might be considered rude, but in like an uncoherent way
Mhm.
because they are deaf and they can't really speak, then it's going to be very apparent that, why they're not wearing a mask. So they're going to immediately be alleviated from the stress, and it's not like the stress would affect them as much anyway, because it's going to be unlikely that they have social anxiety compared to an autistic individual.
Yeah, sorry. I think I'm a bit lost. Could you just repeat this point again? Because I'm not quite following.
It was about like the stigmatization and why I don't think it's going to affect other groups as much as the autistic population or something.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that it's argued that perhaps the majority of people with autism don't have a formal diagnosis, right? So they're out there
The
without.
majority would.
I think it is argued that by some psychologists that the majority of people actually don't have a formal diagnosis because it's overlooked. It's one of those conditions which gets overlooked in
Yeah,
society.
it would normally be overlooked because of less obvious symptoms.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I
Yeah,
don't know if
true.
it's the majority or not. That seems like
Yeah, no, no,
an
you are
an
right,
exaggeration.
and even if it is the majority, it would be the majority of mild cases. You're right, borderline slash mild cases.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, the more severe cases would be picked up. I agree with that point, but the issue is that many people it is at least accepted that many people do meet the criteria but don't have the formal diagnosis. And such people, right, at the moment can travel around without extra discrimination, um, can travel around without a face mask, without extra discrimination. But if you impose your proposition, those people would face extra discrimination because now people would say, "Well, where's your autism card?" And they'd say, "I don't have one," and then they'd presume they're lying or cheating.
I think that would be a very, very minute number of people, considering that most people that are undiagnosed would have less severe symptoms and would
No,
probably
because
just wear the mask anyway.
Yeah, no, but there are a significant proportion of people with quite moderate to severe symptoms who aren't diagnosed because, like I said, it's a postcode lottery. It's 3 years. It's up to 3 years waiting list to get a formal assessment and diagnosis in some areas of the country.
Yeah, but
This
if
is
they
a
had
recognised
serious
problem.
symptoms, they would likely have a diagnosis
Huh?
when they're young, and they could be on a waiting list when they're young, but people under the age of 11 already don't have to wear a mask, so it would be
Yeah,
exempt
but
anyway.
a large proportion of autism is diagnosed in adulthood. Obviously, the
Well,
condition is onset in
but
childhood, but it's.
s- not of severe cases.
Mm, Well, the interesting thing is it's difficult actually because sometimes in the severe cases, I don't think the people would have problems wearing a mask because we're talking about people here with severe learning disabilities and people who have carers and things like that. It's probably more the moderate cases where people do feel they have to wear the mask. Don't sorry, the moderate cases where people
When I
don't
say
wear
severe cases, I'm just referring to in terms of
the mask.
sensory issues,
Yeah.
right?
So those, yes, yeah. So such cases often get overlooked by NHS, by the health services, and they get bypassed, and those people are waiting years for a formal assessment and diagnosis. Yeah, it's very viable because such
At
people can
what
function quite high.
age?
That could be any age. It could be any age. They could go through their whole schooling without being picked up and diagnosed.
If they have severe sensory issues, especially regarding touch, it is normally picked up, especially if you're in the schooling system, because there are people in the schooling system who know about autism and would see the student like expressing symptoms and then suggest that they go for a diagnosis, right? I don't think that many people go into adulthood with severe symptoms of sensory issues without a diagnosis because they'd be
Well, that
present from a young age.
yeah. Well, when you say many, I mean, I think there's a significant proportion that probably do. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the majority, but I think it's a significant
I
amount.
think it would be very minute,
Mm. I don't have the
just
figure. I don't think either of us have.
intuitively.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Intuitively. Um, yeah. I mean, yeah. So my position is just to clarify is that I think the current system is reasonable, where just a sort of um, a token term of severe distress is used to warrant or to
Yeah,
justify not wearing a face mask. And I don't think you need to apply a specific diagnosis to that. I think it actually complicates the issue, and leads to other problems.
yeah. I think maybe we've gone in circles a bit now. So should we just do like closing statements about our positions?
Yeah, I mean that sounds fine to me. That sounds fine to
All
me.
right. So basically, I think that many people with autism, due to like other symptoms that are very likely to be expressed, such as communication issues and social anxiety, would not be able to acceptably be exempt from the face mask rule due to the severe distress exemption. So I think that if you made this blanket term, it would make it very easy for them to have the right to do necessities and go out and do what they need to do. Um, and you could try and come up with some other intervention to decrease the spread of the virus. I'm not sure what that would be. I'm not like a doctor or anything like that, but you could try and come up with some other methodology. And I didn't think that just making it a blanket term would pragmatically make all of the people with an autism diagnosis just claim that they don't have to wear a mask because of that, due to the societal pressure and their issues with social anxiety normally. Um, yeah, so I just think that it would preserve people's rights to introduce this law. Well, it has been like characterized in the autistic like associations anyway, but I think it would be good to do that, and I don't think that people would unnecessarily do it in most cases, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't try and stop them spreading the virus in other ways.
Right. So yeah, as I would like to just end by saying, in determining the verdict in this debate, I think one should work on the premise that COVID-19 is a serious pandemic and not wearing face masks increases mortality rates in the general public.
Yeah,
Following on from this, it seems reasonable to me at least that not wearing a face mask should be the exception and not the rule. In the case of mental disorders like autism, this exception should be based on there being severe mental distress to the individual concerned if they are forced to wear a mask, and a severe distress that warrants the increase in risk of mortality to the general public. It also seems reasonable to me that the majority of people with autism, or at least a significant proportion, would not have severe distress from wearing a face mask. So, therefore, making a blanket rule that people with autism are exempt from wearing face masks is not in the public interest, and it fails on utilitarian principles. Instead, I think the regulations and rules should remain as they are, in stating that people with severe distress caused by wearing face masks are exempt, but not people with specific diagnoses. And as Brandon mentioned, he argues that he thinks that the people with autism, sorry, yeah, he thinks that the amount of people with autism not wearing masks would not increase with his proposition. that's his thought, right? It's not based on any evidence. All the evidence from psychological studies and behavioral studies suggest that it would increase, and that increase necessarily relates to a significant increase in mortality in the general public. So I don't think he's got solid grounds to make those assertions. Now, you may think all of this is insignificant, but we know that when you give people a free pass to do something, they generally do it. And that is, unfortunately, we have to presume that would be the case with the autistic population as well. So, and like I said, you may think, as Brandon's mentioned, that people with autism aren't so fickle to abuse the system like that. And it's not about them being fickle or abusing the system deliberately, but it's just the nature of human beings. That's why it's law to wear a face mask, because the state can't rely on the goodwill principle of people, because it doesn't work. You need to deploy the power of the law to ensure compliance. And I think that's why we have these regulations and restrictions in place at the moment. And I think they should probably continue as they are.